And welcome, Raging the Game Today. I'm David Levin. This is our Friday episode, so we're talking about the inner game of life. Tuesdays are for the mental game of sports and competition. Fridays are for the rest of our lives. So how are you feeling this week? Hope you're doing well. Hope you're able to keep finding the joy and the beauty in your life. Not always top of mind with all that's going on, but it's there. Super important to stay connected to it. The cold and snow have continued here this week. Not terrible, just a little tricky handling the snow when I was on restricted physical activity after my heart procedure we talked about last week. But we worked it out in great part because we have great neighbors who came and cleared the walk a couple of times to help. That's such a lovely thing that is hard to put a value on. Actually having people nearby who care enough about you to help you when you need it. That's amazing. A warm spell is forecast in a week. I'm really looking forward to that. Think about rolling out my new scooter again, but we'll see. Maybe not quite that warm. Plenty to talk about this week. Trump abandoning the rule of law here in America. The U.S. abandoning Ukraine and NATO in Europe. More dreadful MAGA activities. How to avoid doing things we will regret. The war on our attention. Our challenge of the week, and a great new book. All right, we'll start with ups and downs. So what things gave me a lift this week and what things were pulling me down? The first up, speaking of the scooter, I think I mentioned I was having a hard time getting it registered. I went to our local DMV like 3 or 4 times with different versions of the documents that came with it, and they just couldn't get it. That was hard for me to understand. I mean, they were pleasant enough, and they tried to help. There was just something about it. They said I had to send it in to the state. That made me nervous. And I was literally worried that it would end up not being street legal in Wisconsin, which would have been a giant bummer in many ways. So I sent things off to the state, and last week, what comes in the mail but a shiny new title and license plate with a current sticker. It's like 10 below out, or it was that day, but I still went to the garage and put on the new plate because I could. And I'm super happy about it. I can't wait for it to warm up enough to take it out in its new, fully legal state. That was fun. Happy to keep getting better post-procedure. You can hear the throat is still a little off. Otherwise, though, I feel pretty close to normal most of the time, maybe 90%. It's always interesting to come back from something like that, being sick or, whatever, and you feel so far away from normal that you wonder if you'll ever get back there again. But then as you do, to recognize it and just see, oh yeah, this is what this feels like. It feels sort of miraculous in a way. Also, of course, very good. Another couple of fun things. The t-shirt I ordered that says Gulf of Mexico Forever arrived. Happy to wear that. Also, the bumper sticker magnet that says bought it before we knew how awful he was. Got here and is now happily living on the back of our Tesla, which also makes me surprisingly happy. I'm apparently too worried about what others think. But how can you not be? Right? Especially now when everything is so tribal and he's become such a toxic and dangerous element. Anyway, love the new magnet. Also feeling good to be taking a new business course to help me sharpen up our marketing for the Sports Academy. I realized that I have been sort of slipping almost into retirement mindset with it. Things have been slow lately. I haven't really been pushing back on that. I guess in part because we are kind of in that phase of life. And I haven't really had any new ideas for how to do it, but I decided to sign up for this course. And I'm really enjoying the energy of bearing down again and trying to make things happen. We'll see what comes of it, of course, but the feeling is good. Speaking of that phase of life, Margaret and I have been starting to think about other changes too. She's going to be retiring this summer, what we're going to do then, what she's going to do, thinking about a possible business idea there, thinking about maybe even moving to a new house in town. That would be just a huge thing. Those are both fairly fraught decisions, right? Complicated, complex feelings involved, but still pretty excited to just be thinking about things like that. Just be thinking in new ways, fresh ways. It just feels extra alive. For my downs, the main thing is that I can't do anything active for another 3 weeks. No pickleball. I thought I'd be going to the gym by now, but putting that off a little more. And I really miss everything about that. I miss the fun of playing, the feeling of working out, the energy of feeling more active and capable. It's not a huge thing. I know I'll get back to it soon. But it is a bummer to be sitting around so much and waiting. All right, those are my ups and downs for the week. Next up, top stories. This week, let's start with some good news for a change. What a wild idea. So two things caught my attention this week, both aviation related. The first, there's a company called Boom, which is a funny name for them because they're making an airplane that can go faster than the speed of sound without making a sonic boom. You may know, but the Concorde, which was the first and only commercial supersonic plane, was never successful in the U.S. because, like any plane that breaks the sound barrier, it creates this big sonic boom. So it was banned over the continental U.S., which limited its commercial potential quite a bit, as you can imagine. There have been several companies working on limiting the sonic boom in airplanes, but they all do it by changing the shape of the plane. You get this crazy long, pointy noses, like half the length of the plane. They put the engines above the wings, just all kinds of things to try to get there. I think NASA has a new model right now they've been working on. Boom, on the other hand, and this is what I found so interesting, takes a completely different approach. Basically, they don't do anything with the plane itself. They control the boom through altitude and weather. It turns out, in the right conditions, the sound wave from the boom doesn't come all the way to the surface. It sort of bounces off a temperature layer in the air above the ground. And this has apparently been known about for a long time, the physics of this. But we didn't have the technology in engines and computer weather tracking to make it practical. But now we do. So they had a test this week, and for the first time ever, supersonic flight, no sonic boom on the surface. I just think that's super cool. So when they get to the point that they have a full-size commercial plane, that'll still take several years, but it will cut trip times in half for long trips. So like New York to LA, 3 hours versus 6 now. New York to London, 4 hours versus 8. Maybe not the biggest news in the world, but I still thought it was pretty cool. The other aviation news was the crash in Toronto this week where everyone survived. That was so wild. The plane came in, clipped a wing, flipped over upside down on its back, slid down the runway. Everyone got out. 80 people. Such great news. Also, a huge credit to the design of these planes and the training of flight crews and emergency crews on the ground. I mean, it really is amazing to think that everyone survived that. Probably going 150 miles an hour when they landed, flipped upside down. It's wild. But they specifically designed the seats and the seat belts and everything in those planes to be as survivable as possible. And those crews all train for emergencies, and they train like all the time, right? And so doesn't it seem like maybe a bad time, a bad idea to be making drastic cuts to the FAA, who is responsible for all these systems and requirements and testing and training? Yes, it does. It's a terrible, stupid, short-sighted, and dangerous idea, which is pretty much their whole brand at this point. Speaking of terrible, stupid, short-sighted, and dangerous, let's talk Trump and Republicans. It's hard to pick which of these is the worst, but I'll start with his comments about the rule of law. I'm sure you saw this, but he posted, quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any laws," end quote. He who saves his country does not violate any laws. First of all, it turns out that quote was attributed to Napoleon, maybe not the best exemplar of good governance. But this is about as bad as it gets in terms of a threat to our democracy. This idea that as long as you, for whatever reason, believe you are doing something to save the country, it cannot be illegal. First, it's exactly backwards, right? In a rule of law system, which is really the only way to have a democracy when the laws are supreme and no one's above them, in a system like that, going against the law, acting unconstitutionally, by definition, is destroying the country. It's destroying the system. It's not saving it, no matter what you think you're doing. The law has to reign supreme always, or the system doesn't work. So it's bad enough that he believes that he genuinely seems to believe that he should be above the law. It's classic, malignant narcissist. But it gets really dangerous when others believe it and believe that he will protect them in it. So first, Elon, crazy, mad co-president, retweeted it, fully agreed. And of course, he's running rampant right now, doing all kinds of who knows what, very likely illegal things, feeling completely justified and immune and supported because Trump's right there with him saying it's all okay. Trump doesn't get to say what's okay and what's not. No president does. Congress makes the laws. The courts decide what's legal. That's our system. You can't, divert from that. What's the word I'm looking for? Not divert. But anyway, you can't break from that and be in our democracy. It just literally is not how it works. But then, just think about people like the Proud Boys, for example. I'm sure in their twisted white Christian nationalist minds, they believe the violence and intimidation they've done already and are likely planning more of is indeed to save the country. Hasn't every traitor in all of history thought the same thing? John Wilkes Booth, when he assassinated Lincoln, thought that. Timothy McVeigh, when he blew up the Federal Building, killed all those innocent people, thought that. They all think that. But now, not only has Trump, the president, said he agrees with that, he's supporting their efforts. He's already pardoned the people who tried to violently overthrow the 2020 election. Of course, they think they have a free ticket now to do whatever they want in the name of saving what they think of as their country. Honestly, they'd be dumb not to think that. It's the clear message in his comments and his actions. That is the real danger, of course, in Trump's statements on this. And it's right from the authoritarian playbook. Violent militias in the streets informing compliance with the dear leader. It doesn't really get any worse than this. The only thing missing at this point is for people to start taking action based on his implied permission and support. He controls the Justice Department, who can decline to prosecute. He has the pardon for anyone who does get prosecuted, and he's already shown he's willing to protect people, even violent felons who support him. They paid attention when he invited them to the insurrection in 2020. It's many times more overt now. Again, he who saves his country does not violate any laws. He totally believes that about himself, and he is signaling to every other violent crazy in the country that he has your back as long as you support him. It's just a matter of time. The other heartbreaking Trump/Republican item this week is Ukraine. He's just taking all of Putin's talking points and making them our official policy. It really is like he's a pro-Russian operative. It's so insane and unbelievable. He says Ukraine started the war. Obviously, they did not start the war. They were invaded, and for no reason. Putin says he had no choice because they wanted to join NATO. Of course he had a choice. He gave the orders, sent in the troops. He's continued to send them to fight and die for 3 years. He's invited his allies and friends, North Korea, to help him continue to send people to fight and die for years. Bombing civilian targets, bombing the energy grid in the middle of winter, kidnapping and re-educating thousands of children. He doesn't have to do any of that. He wants to do it because he has delusional beliefs about Ukraine not being a real independent country. He has delusional ideas about rebuilding the Soviet Empire. But the claim that NATO was a threat is just a joke. No one believes it. No one takes it seriously. No serious person anyway. But now our president has the exact same position. It's all Ukraine's fault. We no longer support them. And this last bit I just can't understand at all, which is that we are now negotiating with Russia to end the war without Ukraine being involved in the negotiations. Who can possibly think that makes any sense? We're not in the war. Who do we think we are to make deals on Ukraine's behalf and tell them what they have to accept? That is really, you can think whatever you want about their general opinions, but it just makes no sense. So let's also just step back a minute and talk about what a no-brainer it's been to support Ukraine in this war. This has been one of the best foreign policy and world peace investments in history. We're weakening one of our main adversaries, massively weakening them in every way. We are strengthening democratic forces around the world, strengthening Europe and NATO, sending a strong message to China not to try a similar thing in Taiwan, and doing it all for pennies on the dollar and not risking a single American soldier. By any normal, sane metric, we should be all in on this and not giving an inch. This pivot by Trump and Republicans undoes all of that and exposes us and the whole world to massive destabilization and escalation. It could not be more wrong-headed and destructive. Again, we are the strongest country in the world, right? There's no doubt about that. But Trump ignores or just simply doesn't understand that what makes us strong is our relationships and our goodwill with other countries. When we lose those, everything else is at risk in ways we can't even imagine now. Just chaos and conflict everywhere. And by the way, no one is happier about all this than Russia and China. Russian media, their foreign minister, they are literally giddy with excitement over what's been happening. Their comments are just, they can't believe their luck. And that alone tells you everything you need to know about how wrong and dangerous this is. If our main rivals are giddy about it, you would think that would give us pause. Unfortunately, that's not our president or his party. They don't like democracy. They just simply don't. They like authoritarian regimes. So we're officially on that team now. Trump has made us part of the axis of evil. Not hyperbole, man. And Republicans, national security hawks, Russian hawks, are saying nothing about it. It seems impossible, but that's where we are. And you can bet every other country in the world sees that clearly and will respond accordingly, and soon. Oh my goodness. Some smaller items, but still plenty dumb and dangerous. Elon and the USDA accidentally fired bird flu experts in the middle of our current outbreak. And we have kind of an unprecedented outbreak going on right now. They're trying to figure out how to hire them back. Not sure how to do it. Elon also fired people in the U.S. Nuclear Weapons Agency before he realized that they oversee our nuclear weapons and keeping them safe. Experts call this a national security crisis. They're trying to figure out how to hire them back too. On the corruption watch, it turns out that the agencies Elon is targeting for cuts, it's not actually about efficiency and waste. They're primarily going after groups that are perceived as being more liberal, whatever that means to them, and that oversee his businesses. So it's really about politics and corruption. No surprise there. Again, the only reason to get rid of regulators is if you plan to break those rules. You think you're entitled to break those rules, and that's exactly what he's doing. Just a little pushback, a small one, but Sheryl Crow, the great Sheryl Crow, I love her, officially sold her Tesla this week, announced that she can no longer associate herself with Elon and all he's doing, and then donated the proceeds from it to NPR, which is one of the many, many, many groups that's under attack from the Doge group. Got a little bit of a kick out of that. Not quite there yet with ours, going with the sticker for now, but thinking about it. For our crazy of the week, Representative Claudia Tenney from New York proposed making Trump's birthday a national holiday. That is just embarrassing. I mean, really. But I imagine we're going to see a lot more of that kind of crazy cult stuff for our great leader. We had a local guy in our little town arrested this week for firing a gun from his car during a road rage incident. It's a classic example of what I talk about in my Going Crazy video. People are losing their minds, saying things, acting out in all kinds of irrational, angry ways, doing things they would otherwise never do and would be ashamed of, because that's what happens to our minds when we're stressed out. We lose our ability to think clearly, and our fearful, angry emotions take over. As a reminder, speaking of that, we have a helpful educational video available called Why Everyone's Going So Crazy and What You Can Do About It. Link in the show notes if you'd like to make at least some sense of all this. And please do share that with others if you think they would find it helpful. But we really want to make sure this doesn't happen to us. I doubt if you're listening to this that you're likely to shoot at someone while they're driving. But hey, you never know. None of us are immune. And things are getting more and more crazy every day. And it's going to be a long 4 years. Anyway, that is Top Stories this week. Next up, Inner Game Gold. Last week we talked about worrying, being suffering in advance, and how it's such a help if we can get some control over that. This week I want to talk again about my favorite Zen story, if you remember. There are two monks walking along. They come upon a young maiden who needs help crossing the flooded stream. The old monk picks her up, carries her across, sets her down, and they continue on for some time. Finally, the younger monk says, "I can't believe you did that. You know we're not allowed to touch women. How could you pick her up and carry her like that?" To which the old monk says, "Brother, I set her down back there. Why are you still carrying her?" That always tickles me. It's such a perfect illustration of the dynamics of our inner game. But it's on my mind because of the story I just mentioned about the guy shooting his gun at someone in a road rage incident. Think about the mental process that went into that for him. We can assume it started when the other person did something, cut him off in traffic. Who knows what? Nothing to justify the shooting, of course, but there was probably some initial trigger. And then this guy's mind took over, just like the young monks did. He kept thinking about what had happened, kept holding on to it, playing it over and over in his mind. The more he did, the lower he moved in his internal state, getting more emotional and riled up physically until finally his emotions took over. And in that moment, the only thing that made sense was to pull out his gun and take a shot at the other person. But now, as a result of that genius thinking, he's in jail. His name and picture are in the paper. There are certainly more bad consequences to come. And we can hope that it all now seems like a bad idea. What was I thinking? But again, in the moment, when he was in that lower state, it all made perfect sense. It's the same thing with the two monks. The whole purpose of being a monk is to learn to separate yourself from your ego and your thinking mind so you can be fully present in the moment and serve others. You get more and more humble and respectful of everything. But in this story, he let his mind pull him 180 degrees away from all that. He got stuck in the loop in his head. His emotions took over. It wasn't as dramatic as our guy taking a shot, but it still turned him into someone we assume he was ashamed of afterwards. It was certainly against his vows and intentions as a monk. But this is what happens to all of us when we let our lower impulses take over. We think and say and do things that we end up regretting and that in some cases do real harm to ourselves and the people we care about. So that's the lesson in this Zen story. Don't let that happen. Don't let your mind latch onto things in a way that pulls you down and turns you into your lesser self. You want to learn to recognize when it's happening and cut it off before it gets away from you. And of course, quick plug, that's exactly what you learn in all of our Raise Your Inner Game materials, the book, Sports Academy training, and our executive coaching. In any case, that's Inner Game Gold for this week, this great Zen story of the two monks. Brother, I set her down back there. Why are you still carrying her? Next up, raise your outer game. This week we're talking about attention. That might sound like an inner game issue, and it is, but it also has to do with external things in our life, like our phones, for example, and maybe mostly our phones. There's a new book out by Chris Hayes from MSNBC called The Sirens Call, How Attention Became the World's Most Endangered Resource. I haven't read the book, just a little of the coverage of it, but a couple things stood out. One was a study in which subjects were given the, quote, opportunity to experience negative stimulation if they so desired, end quote, meaning they could give themselves an electric shock. So they could either sit with their thoughts and potentially be bored, or shock themselves and feel that pain. And the results, 67% of men and 25% of women gave themselves at least one electric shock rather than sit with their thoughts. That's funny. Of course, boredom isn't new and no one likes to be bored. You can almost imagine giving yourself at least one of those shocks just to see what it's like. You assume it's at a safe level or they couldn't be offering it in the study. But the other big factor is the massive industry that's grown up around monetizing our attention. There's actually a term for it. It's called the attention economy. You may have heard of that. It's Facebook and YouTube and Netflix and Instagram and TikTok, all the algorithms that are designed to keep our attention so we can see more ads. And it really is no more complicated than that. That's what they want. They want more time on the platform so we can look at more ads. It's the same business model as old school television, trading attention for ads, just turned up to its ultimate level by modern online technology. Bottom line, the smartest engineers in the world are working day and night to figure out how to capture more and more of our attention. This is why when you're streaming a show and you get to the end of the episode, the time before it automatically skips to the next episode has gotten shorter and shorter, right? You have to aggressively jump to get there before it starts playing the next one. It's why the feeds in Instagram and Facebook and TikTok scroll versus making you turn to the next page. It's more psychologically addictive to scroll, and they know that. They've tested it. It's an intentional design decision on their part. They're using the most advanced psychology and neuroscience to manipulate us, and it's totally working. I know in my own life, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I have been changed by this. I really think so. I think it feels like a genuine rewiring of my system. I can't watch a show now without my phone, if not open next to me, at least right there where I can check it. And then when there's any slightly slow moment in the show, I'll check how much time is left. I'll pick up my phone and check for new messages. I can't just sit there and be with it and just let it unfold the way it normally was designed to do. And this is especially ridiculous with me because I don't get many messages that I need to respond to right away, like ever. There's no universe where it's not totally fine for me to go an hour or two without checking in. So it's not based in any reality. I'm not risking harming a relationship or business or anything. It's just pure physical stimulus addiction. And I'm an old guy who didn't get exposed to all this until it, came on the scene. I was probably 50 years old already. Imagine what it's like for kids who've grown up with it and don't know any different. By the way, if you're a parent or involved with your school and you haven't read the book The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, Haidt, highly recommend you read that and share it with your school. The strong recommendations based on lots of research are for no smartphones for kids until they're 14 and no social media until they're 16. But this is a major thing for us to be mindful of and intentional with in our own lives. What's happening with our attention? How much is it being controlled and altered by our online lives? And what can we do to get some of that control back? The best recommendation is to limit access and exposure for set periods of time. Set aside sometimes during the day when you're just phone free, like many schools are doing now. Our kids' school doesn't allow phones on field trips, for example. They'll go on a multi-day road trip, hours in the car together, no phones. They grumble before they go. They love it afterwards. My daughter recently got back from a class trip to Chicago, like 6 hours in the van each way, no phone the whole time. It stayed here. She had a great time and said the drives were the best part. What do you suppose they would have done on those drives if everyone had their phone, right? They would have sat there glued to it the whole time. It's night and day. So really, it's just about forcing ourselves to disconnect, even if it's just for short periods of time. All right, that's Raise Your Outer Game this week. Take control of your attention. Take some breaks from your phone. Sort of a hybrid inner-outer game topic. Next up, our challenge of the week. Guess what? We're going to work on this week. The challenge is find one chunk of time, one period during your day when phones are just off limits. Maybe it's first thing in the morning until you're at the breakfast table. Maybe it's over lunch. Maybe it's during dinner or for an hour or two in the evening. You decide what's possible. But set aside some time and challenge yourself to not even pick it up during that time. No interaction of any kind. And see if you can do it and see what it feels like. especially if you can exchange that time for doing something with someone else, playing a game, watching a show together, could be anything. But notice the quality difference in your experience and your energy when you do real things and let them unfold as they naturally do, like our daughter's field trip I mentioned. And then just in general, practice resisting the pull of your phone or checking your texts or your email. Just every now and then, when you notice the pull, just reject that one, okay? Just say, nope, not now. We can wait a few more minutes. Just something like that. The more you can be intentional with your attention, the less power all this has over you and the richer and less stressful your life becomes. All right, that's the challenge for this week. Try it out. See what you make of that. Next up, highly recommended. I did find a new book, and it is excellent. I can't remember ever loving a book so completely, so quickly. For real, the first page just totally lit me up, and it's been great fun ever since. The book is called The Humans by Matt Haig, H-A-I-G, Haig. I've read and loved 2 other books of his, so I'm not surprised to be loving this one, but it's just so good and weird and interesting. So the basic premise is the main character is an alien sent here on a mission to keep humans from making a discovery that will enable us to go out and threaten them and others in the universe. At least that's what they think the risk is. And the book is him basically telling the story of what he's seeing and doing and thinking, telling the story back, communicating all that back to the folks back home. Sorry, that's hard to say. It's not a totally new premise, I guess, but it feels very fresh and fun, in part because him being an alien sets him up to make really great and on-point observations about us as a species. It's funny and sweet. I'm about halfway through it right now. Anyway, totally loving it. Highly recommended so far. I started the final season of Better Call Saul. Can't tell where it's going. I'm going to miss it, honestly. I really am. It's that good. But I still have 8 episodes or so to go. Hope it wraps everything up. Well, that's always the fear, right? As you come to the end of a big series. Excited to hear that another of our favorite shows, The Last of Us on Apple TV, has season 2 coming out in April. I'm sure we'll be getting into that. But that's a ways from now. For now, it's The Humans and wrapping up Better Call Saul. And that's it for this week's show. Reminder, Raise Your Inner Game Sports Academy. If you're an athlete or the parent of an athlete, it's perfect for you. The book itself, Raise Your Inner Game, there's probably literally nothing would be more helpful in fighting this battle we talked about over our attention than what you learn in that book. And of course, our executive coaching program brings it all together. RaiseYourInnerGame.com for the sports programs, david11.com for coaching information. All right, I hope you have a great week. Let me know any questions. Otherwise, keep up the good work. I'll see you next week.